I really want to be sure that people get this as the major takeaway here. I am not worth idolizing. Neither is anybody else. Hey, folks. This is an odd video, and I'm not even entirely sure how I'm going to title it. But I had a thought earlier today that I wanted to share, and it's about stan culture. I will kind of give an explanation for that. If you're watching me and if you're like watcher of video essays, and like, I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about, but I will sort of give an overview. But this is not going to be a dissection of stan culture or the history of it or whatever. I am basically taking two things as a given. Stan culture exists and is, on the whole, bad, just as a thing. So the short version is that a stan is like a fan plus. Like if you're a fan of something or someone, you enjoy that thing. Maybe you follow what they do and you keep on top of new releases of projects, if it's some sort of artist of a kind, or you maybe check out what their tour schedule is, if they're a musician of some sort, et cetera, et cetera. You're like, oh, I am a fan of their work. I want to keep on top of this. Now, the term stan, first of all, its origins are really telling and really should have been the first dang thing. But that term is taken from an Eminem song about an obsessed fan who turns violent when they feel underappreciated by the object of their obsession, which in that case was Eminem. Here's a couple of things that I'm gonna say about this. For me, when things kind of cross over from just being a fan of a thing to being a stan of a thing is when you go from simply appreciating the work of someone to actively needing to defend them and needing them to be the hero of something. The hero or the victim, either will work. Now, I'm not going to say it's impossible to be a stan for corporations, brands, franchises, but like honestly, I think most of the really toxic elements of that kind of more generalized fandom are often not super sincerely held. I've kind of talked before about digging into the toxic side of fandom and how that can often be weaponized and stoked by people who are seeking to profit from it. So that's not really what I'm talking about. So I am really more focusing on the idea of people who, I mean, will casually use a phrase like, oh, I stan this writer, singer, YouTuber, what have you. And as I said, I am taking it as a given that this is bad, because I do think that degree of idolization is inherently toxic. And that is not a super new observation, really. I think that's actually decently accepted at this point from most people paying attention to what fan and or stan culture is like. But I found myself really thinking about, okay, but why is it that you have to do more than just like a thing? That you even have to do more than just defend someone if you enjoy their stuff? That you have to actively go out and figure out who are the enemies of the person who I really love. And then you go out and you attack them. Because that's, in my mind, kind of the core essence of a lot of superfan or stan behavior. It's not just that you like this thing. It's that you have built an identity around liking this thing. And more to the point, anyone who you perceive as being against this thing, or more directly in a lot of cases, the person who makes it, they must be destroyed. And this kind of goes beyond standard fan wars. This is not just a matter of Marvel versus DC or Star Wars versus Star Trek. Again, a lot of those kinds of old school fan battles have been hijacked for their own form of toxicity, but it is kind of a different thing, especially because those have been roped into culture war narratives. And culture war doesn't really have to enter into a conversation about stands or these, this elevation of individual creators of any kind. But here was the thought that occurred to me. I think the reason this is easy to fall into, even to a far lesser degree where it doesn't quite go into full-on standing, is that we really crave clean narratives. I found myself wondering about this because of something very specifically that happened with a creator who I do consider myself a fan of. And then something happened. I am going to go over it, but I'm going to go over it really broadly because the specifics super don't matter. Like, they just don't. But I want to get to the bit that does. So if you are familiar with Miracle of Sound, Gavin, he is a musician. He's a singer. I like his stuff a lot. He does a lot of pop culture influenced songs, many of them based off video games, some based off movies. I got into his stuff back around 2014. I haven't kept up with all of it, but I've kept up with a fair bit of it. I like the style of stuff he does. I like that he shakes it up to better match the sort of oral soundscape of the thing that he's referencing with each piece of music that he does. I really enjoy his stuff. And throughout a chunk of this year, he got into a spat with a singer by the name of Peyton Parrish. And I don't know a ton about Parrish, but I do know that the two of them ended up collaborating because Parrish initially did a cover of one of Miracle of Sound's songs called Valhalla Calling, which ended up being very successful. I mean, that song was already very successful for Miracle of Sound, but Peyton has a very deep voice that really gave it an additional feeling that sort of made the song do even more. And the two actually collaborated on a version of the song with both of them on it. Valhalla calling me, Valhalla calling me. There ended up being, again, I'm going to be super broad and super vague about this. There ended up being some spats and some disagreements between them about what should or shouldn't be happening, either with the use of these songs or the royalties with these songs. And I knew that was going on. And my natural inclination was to assume Gavin's right and Peyton is a creep. Like that, my brain automatically defaulted to that. And I didn't really stop and examine it until Gavin put out this. Actually, to be fair, both Gavin and Peyton put out this exact same thing, basically saying, hey, we're sorry that our disagreement went as public as it did. We have resolved it privately, so please let this go. And that took my brain a hot minute to click into place because I'd already assigned the roles of good guy and bad guy. But now, for me to honor the wishes of the person who, again, I'm still a fan of, I had to disentangle that entire thought process and be like, okay, but there isn't a good guy and bad guy in this. And then I just found myself stopping and thinking, why did I even need there to be in the first place? Like, I only knew about this because it was being talked about by one of them, who I only kind of follow on social media, and I only kind of knew what was going on, but I still cast good guy, bad guy. Why? I think there's something very fundamental about the human condition, especially at this point in time in the world that we currently exist in. And to explain what that is, I want to ask a question. What would you say is the defining feature of escapist media? Because not all forms of entertainment, books, video games, films, etc., are necessarily escapist. Some things are not. Some things are meant to be far more of a reflection of reality rather than feel like an escape from it. And you might find yourself thinking fantastical elements like, aliens or magic or supernatural things or whatever else. The thing is, while those are common to escapist media, I don't think you can define escapist media by it. There's plenty of escapist media that doesn't have that. I'd call most of James Bond pretty dang escapist. I think the fundamental core of escapist media, if not the defining feature, at least something that is present in pretty much anything that I would consider escapist media, is a clean narrative of good guy and bad guy. We know this is who we root for. This is the bad person we want to fail. It's neat, it's clean, and it is an escape from the messy reality in which we live, where there are plenty of bad people, there are plenty of good people, but it is not super common in any individual instance between two individual people that you could actually clearly cast that way. But we do anyways, and we want to, because it's a cleaner narrative. This is one of the things that really can lean into sort of pre-existing biases, confirmation bias. You know, when you hear something bad about somebody you already don't like, you automatically assume it's correct because you've already cast them in the role of bad guy. And so it can throw you off when something comes out about someone who you've stuck into the pile of bad person, and you go, oh, well, that's kind of a decent thing that they said or did or what have you. And it can be equally jarring when someone who you've cast in the role of good guy does or says or is revealed to believe something that you find distasteful or even abhorrent. Like, I've had to deal with that fairly recently with the Neil Gaiman videos. And while I don't think I ever stand the man, I was a fan of his work. I was for decades. And in my mind, based off the version of himself he presented, even though I know consciously it's never as simple as someone is good or someone is bad, I can't stop part of my brain from doing a general sorting of like, okay, yeah, maybe it's not this clean cut, but, you know, generally speaking, good guys, bad guys. And life is not that simple. I have members of my own family who I know for a fact, come November, are going to vote for a party that is actively campaigning against my existence, basically. But I also saw a bunch of them over the summer at a family-related event, and they were nice, they were pleasant, they talked to me, and they weren't mean or bigoted. They asked me how I was, they were sincere. They're not bad people. But they are still going to vote in a way that is going to directly harm me. Contradictions are messy. They are draining to try and reconcile or to wrap our heads around. And I think that is why clean, clear, good guys, bad guys is core to escapist media. What does this have to do with stan culture? Well, I think part of the nature of this aspect of super fandom has to do with, well, what I'm doing right now with social media, with the rise of influencers, for lack of a better way to put it. Anyone who is making a online presence a key part of their life and or living, this is my living, support me on Patreon if you feel so inclined. I haven't done a plug mid video before. We'll see if that works better than sticking it at the end. I don't know. We'll see. But the more that people in positions like me and what I do, we, by our nature, blur the lines between a person's work and that person. Now, some people who do the kinds of things that I do don't put themselves personally forward as much as I and a lot of others do. You know, there are people who I follow or have talked with or even consider friends, like Channel Pup, Pillar of Garbage, who are not forward-facing. I'm not going to say that they've never shown themselves on camera, but I don't think you'd be able to spot either of them in a crowd, even if you're a big fan of their work. Me, ultimately, most of what you see is my face. So if you know my work, you know my face. Unless you, like, just put this down and set it aside and you're doing something else like like cooking or cleaning or something, you're just listening to this as if it was a podcast, which that's fine. I'm not even going to take it personally. I mean, I put all this makeup on. You could appreciate that, but fine. Fine. That was sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. I genuinely, like, I do that. I can't judge people for doing that. But I think the more that people's personal lives, and not just influencers, like celebrities as well, your traditional celebrities like movie stars, and even some of your more low-key celebrities like successful fan favorite writers or artists or what have you, as they are able to put more of themselves out there, their fans are already used to engaging with things from them in an escapist manner, going to movies that they star in that are escapists, and they get to sort good guy, bad guy. And now they start putting more of themselves forward. And if a situation crops up where they appear to be at odds with somebody, why not keep rolling with the escapist instinct? Good guy, bad guy. And that's where a lot of the toxicity comes in. Extra toxicity. I mean, beyond the standard current fandom toxicity that I've talked about elsewhere. This is where you get wars between people who are stands of different creators who, for one reason or another, have a falling out or some kind of beef or are calling each other out or what have you. And that, again, to come back to Miracle of Sound, that spat between him and Peyton Parrish didn't even last that long. But in my head, I'd still cast them. Good guy, bad guy. Without meaning to. Without trying to. The thing is, I see fights break out between two creators. And I'm not going to name names other than the example I already did, which was just to explain where this got in my headspace. But I've seen two creators who might otherwise have reason to either get along or, frankly, just not pay attention to each other. Like, there's no reason to. One will say something about the other will fire back. And regardless of how messy individual things said between these two people get, where the real ugliness comes in is from their fans going after each other creator and the fans of other creators and anyone associated with other creators. I think the investment in this idea of assigned good guys and bad guys is what really tips things over. It's what really creates the imbalance that leads to genuinely toxic behavior. I have a piece of advice that I've given to people. Actually, I've often given this advice to people who were getting married. And then, like, this is my relationship advice. And it's very simple. Don't be an asshole. And I know that sounds oversimplified, but, like, I mean it emphatically. Because the truth is, you know when you're being an asshole. You do. You do. But the thing is, there will be circumstances under which you have convinced yourself, oh, but it's okay because. And the most common one is, it's okay because this is a bad person who deserves it. There are other excuses people might have too. It's okay because I've had a bad day, and it's okay because this person ticked me off. It's okay because this person's from this kind of group that is inherently bad. Whatever it might be, whatever excuse you've made, you know when you're being an asshole, just don't. I mean, I offer that as relationship advice. That's also kind of general life advice. I'd really, like, if there's one overriding message I would like people to take away from anything I've said, it would be that. Because you know when you are. But you've come up with a reason why it's okay. And that is kind of at the heart of this really toxic stuff that goes on within stan culture and really hardcore fandoms. Because you have gone in for that escapist simplification of this person is bad, and therefore also anyone associated with them is bad, their fans are bad, because you firmly box them in as bad guy, it justifies what you're doing. The simple thing for me is, if that person was someone else, would you think this is okay? And if the answer is no, don't do it. But we crave that simplicity because the world doesn't give it to us. The world is a complicated disaster. Nothing is simple. Nothing is clean. Anyone who ever tries to tell you, oh, it's really very simple, is lying to you and possibly to themselves. Nothing is simple. And even things where I feel the actual best course of action within certain circumstances is pretty straightforward, that doesn't mean the situation is simple. Because there are times where I think it is very clear what the best thing to do or the worst thing to do under certain circumstances is, but it's still inherently complicated because we still live in a world that has created this situation. And that is all complicated. But we don't want complication. We want simplicity. We crave simplicity. And if we can stick people in the role of good guy or bad guy, and especially if somebody who we've labeled good guy, we feel like they're under attack, or if there's somebody they've said something nasty about, like, ooh, that's the bad guy, let's get him.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him.
This is part of why I get very nervous ever talking about other YouTubers. I've only done it on a handful of occasions, and generally it was on topics where my personal investment was not part of the conversation. Like when I've talked about, say, Illuminati or James Somerton, it was about the overall situation or a specific aspect of the situation that I thought was worth talking about, not about the bad things that person X did, or at least I tried very hard not to have it be about that. But the thing is, anything that can be framed as drama, especially here on YouTube, that stan culture makes it successful. You put out a takedown of somebody, oh, the engagement. Your fans go into their comments and start slagging them off. They get into fights with that other person's fans. They start showing up in the original person's comments, arguing with each other. There's responses, there's counter responses. It becomes a mess. And I'm actually, frankly, really lucky that the one time I did directly address when someone specific decided to do a takedown on me, that that person did not then respond back again, and it became a recurrent back and forth. I'm actually really, really, really grateful for that. I think largely just because they didn't give a damn about me. Like, it was never about me. I just fit a narrative they were looking to do anyway. And like, I'm not hiding the identity out of some kind of, ooh, high and mighty. Like, I've talked about this before. If any of you have been around for a while, you know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to mention names this time because it feels counterproductive to the topic of this video today. If there is a takeaway besides don't be an asshole, it's that no matter how much you like somebody, you shouldn't be fighting battles on their behalf, even if they asked you to. Now, when I say battles, I mean against other individuals. If somebody's getting crap from a major corporation, if YouTube's screwing them over and you want to add to the number of voices going, hey, YouTube, what the hell? Cool, go for it. All day long. I support that. But when we're talking individual versus individual, let them fight their own battles. The instant it becomes a war of fandoms, a war between the stands, everybody loses. Because it's just harsh and hateful and toxic and bad. This is just a real bad aspect of online culture that is not going to go away. I have no illusions that me talking about this is going to change anything. Because like I said, while I don't consider myself a stan of Miracle of Sound, that core basic thing of sorting into good guys, bad guys, my brain still did it, even though I didn't intentionally mean for that to happen. There's core underlying things that our brains, for most of us, tend to do on their own, simply trying to simplify the world. Because we want it so badly not to be the complicated disaster that it is. But it is. It's not fun to be reminded of that. That's why we have escapism. That's why we love escapist media. And it's why we start to treat people, creators, in the same way that we treat our escapist heroes and villains. This also honestly contributes to the fact that often the harshest critics and the meanest people talking out against somebody will be people who used to stan them. Like, nobody can hate someone as much as someone who used to love them. But that's a whole other conversation. And I don't know if digging into, adoration being flipped into abhorrence is a topic that I feel like digging into, but it definitely could be its own completely separate topic. It's very easy because, again, for that cleanness. Oh, the person who I thought was good has done something to let me down, whatever it might be. Their actions, their beliefs, something they said, something they failed to do that you expected of them. Well, if we have already accepted this binary of good guys, bad guys, if they're not the good guy anymore, they must be the bad guy. But now they're also the worst kind of bad guy. They're the traitor. Because no matter how bad the villains who have always been evil are, the most despised villain is always going to be the betrayer. And when you are casting real life people as good guys and bad guys, then yeah, that switch getting flipped, it goes hard. And if you hadn't guessed, this is not limited to online culture, online personalities. It's something that I'm seeing in a frustrating amount of political discourse. But speaking of not wanting to overcomplicate my life, that's definitely a road that I'm not going to go any further down, and we're going to stop it right there. Don't stan me. If you see somebody attacking me somewhere, just walk away. Just think to yourself, would Vera want me to get into a fight over this? I'm telling you right now, the answer is no. No. Walk away. Don't be an ass. And I know it's tempting, but if you can do that for me, I know I'd appreciate it. Again, I think I'm lucky enough, and part of this might just be the nature of how I talk about things, that I try really hard not to paint individuals in good guys, bad guy terms, even when I talk about people who have done pretty bad things. But I try really hard not to get to that level of simplicity. I will paint corporations as the bad guys, always and forever, because despite the legal fiction, corporations are not people. So, f*** them. But people are. And forcing people into the simplified narrative does them no favors, does you no favors, even though it feels better. I just wanted to get those thoughts out there. I mean, ultimately, this all spawned from my notion of the simplicity of good guys and bad guys being at the heart of escapism and how that fed into fan and stan culture. I just wanted to share that thought and see where it led me, which is here. Did you find where it led me to be interesting, or did you find this to be nonsense? Sometimes I have a really specific plan going into these videos. Sometimes I just kind of go and see what I get. This is one of those second ones. For the record, if you couldn't have guessed already. But whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, and subscribe. Ooh, I did the Patreon plug already. Should I have done it a second time? It's automatic at this point. Like I can't stop my brain. I was going on autopilot at that point. Whatever. Like, share, subscribe. Those also help. Links to other things I do in the description. Don't worry too much about it though. Because what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. And I'm going to add an additional thing because this is how I sign off my Twitch streams if you've never watched me there. Be well, be safe, and be kind. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melinda Pedersen, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Gene Foray, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Frenobulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperel, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam R. D.L. Taylor, Palba Rabajoggle, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you're wondering about this little guy, this is Nymph. He's new. Don't worry, the other two are fine. He's just not fully socialized with them yet. You'll see them all together soon. Won't they? I say, well.